very, very fortunate this evening to have some phenomenal folks to help us explore ESG. And with that, we would, what I've got decided to do, since there's so many of them, we're just going to go around the room and everybody, all 6 of them, will spend a couple minutes giving us their background and how they got to this part of the real estate industry. Again, all of them are specialists in this part of the real estate industry. So we're going to start, and I'm just going to go through my Brady Bunch squares, and I'm going to start with Evan Weissman from Donahoe.
Hey, everybody. I am Evan Wiseman with Donahoe Development, and I'm a 2007 GW MBA graduate. I studied real estate and urban development, and Rob was there at the time, I think just starting the center. So it's nice to be back. I also am the GW liaison for the ULI Urban Plan program, which this year has been brought to GW with Elaine. And my career has gone from the private sector to the public sector, or through public real estate companies back to private. So when I got out of school, I went to a fairly small developer in DC doing office buildings. Then I went to a public REIT, also in the DC area, doing mixed use. And then I went to an office REIT. And now I'm at Donahoe, which is a private but much larger company, about 1,200 employees at the moment. And we have a variety of businesses. We have the development company, which I lead, but then we also have a hotel company that owns and manages hotels, which has been very challenging, obviously, lately. And we have a real estate company that does office property management, leasing, retail, leasing. We have a facilities company that manages 40 million feet of a variety of buildings all around the area. And we have a construction company, which we're probably most known for. So in terms of ESG, we have a corporate level focus, and then we also have focuses within the businesses. So happy to be here and share more about that.
Terrific, Evan. Thank you very much. I forgot to mention that we are extremely fortunate because we do have a lot of GW alums on this panel. One of the focuses of the panel is to bring to the real estate community and our students the hot topics that are currently pressing the industry. And we always want to have, as part of that panel, some of our GW alums. So we're extremely fortunate to have 4 on this panel. So it's pretty exciting. So why don't we go to the next one on my screen, which is Dan Winters.
Hi, Elaine, thank you so much for having me. To everybody here, my name is Dan Winters. I am Senior Director at GRESB. I've been part of our organization since 2014. And you'd asked a little bit about how I got here. And so I've got a couple master's degrees in real estate finance. The second one happened at a moment back in 2001 and 2 when these really cool things came about. Energy Star was launched in 1999 and LEED was released to the marketplace in 2001. I was wandering around a campus and somebody kept tapping me on the shoulder saying, "Finance guy, hey, check out this green building stuff. It's really cool." And so that was 20 years ago. And I've now been part of this industry ever since. I've spent time at the U.S. Green Building Council, which then navigated me to GRESB. What is GRESB? We're the global benchmark for institutional real estate when it comes to environmental, social, and governance issues. So right now we have a portal and it's open for folks around the globe, and they are pouring in and they are benchmarking their programs and their buildings and their processes against their peers and understanding who's doing well on these issues. And it's a big tent of issues. We're going to get into those today, as well as who's just getting started and trying to understand what this is all about. At the end of the day, what we're collectively doing as as a group is we're pushing the industry forward. And what happens is an organization comes in, they get their benchmark, and sometimes it's really, really great. And they're like, this is awesome. And then that puts some pressure because they need to do more to maintain that score. The other side of the coin is somebody comes into the benchmark and they score, something that, like on an exam, a midterm, when you're like, uh-oh, that wasn't so good. And that puts light underneath, a little light in the fire to get firms moving forward and progressing over time. So it's been really great. We expect roughly 2,000 plus institutional portfolios, whether these are listed companies like Evan was talking about that he worked at, as well as private equity funds and firms to participate in the benchmark this year. So more to come during our time today. Back to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Dan. That's great. Dan forgot to mention that he and I have known each other for almost 25 years. He and I went to one of those master's degrees, happened to be where I went to school as well. So when I came to DC and saw Dan, he's an alumni from UW-Madison, and I saw he was here, he and I touched base. And then when we decided to do this panel, he was the first person I called. So thank you again, Dan, for joining us. Next on my square is John Green. And again, John Green is his company is, where are you, John? Is Black Star Stability. And he has joined our alumni, our center board. And so with that, John.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Green, Managing Principal of Black Star Stability. We are a DC-based real estate investment management company focused on expanding equitable ownership of affordable single-family properties. And we do that in some ways that are pretty unique. In particular, we focus on naturally occurring affordable houses and properties that are generally encumbered by predatory forms of seller financing. And so my journey to Black Star Stability, which is was really anchored by the 10 years before it that I spent at a real estate private equity company called McFarland Partners. I led the East Coast division of that. Traditional commercial investor, but one that had a social bent on many of the deals that they would do. So a lot of public-private deals, a lot of affordable housing mixed in with other forms of mixed use sorts of solutions, and really across asset classes, mostly opportunistic. And I also led our emerging manager program. But one of the things that always kind of plagued the solutions that we would provide at McFarland were that the affordable housing solutions were always oriented around multifamily and rental. And many of them tended to piggyback off of various forms of tax credits, public subsidies, et cetera, never getting to these issues of ownership and in particular of single family properties. And so that led to a focus when I started Black Star Stability on precisely those issues. So we are excited to be here. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to sharing more with you.
Fantastic, John. Yeah, no, I'm really excited to hear more too. John and I had lunch together a couple of weeks ago, I guess, well, maybe months now, and it was just fascinating to hear some of what he's doing. So I think you guys will really enjoy hearing the kinds of things they're up to. So the next person on my square is Eric Ramison, and his dad's here too. So that's cool.
Yeah, #1 fan.
Yeah,
how's it going? Thanks, Elaine. How's it going, everyone? I'm Eric Abramson. Nice to be here. I'm currently a product owner at Measurable, which is the world's most widely adopted ESG software for commercial real estate. Got around 12 billion square feet using the platform across like 100 countries or so. But how did I end up there, and what does that have to do with GW? I graduated GW in 2016. I started out in the business school, and freshman year wanted to declare my minor in sustainability, and because that's obviously a focus of mine, and that was going to take up kind of more free electives than I would have liked. So moved on over, majored in economics and minored in sustainability, but stayed very involved in the school business, specifically in what was then called REDO, which was the real estate club. Was very active in there and was very thankful for that, and Rob's participation in kind of just bringing in speakers and being exposed to the commercial real estate network at GW. Somehow found myself president or co-president of that club junior and senior year. And that's when we renamed it to CREN, the Commercial Real Estate Network. I'm not sure if there's a new name now, maybe every few years goes through a rebrand. Cool, still CREN as sticking power. And yeah, basically after that, I had kind of this, nexus with my studies of economics and sustainability, and then all these extracurriculars in real estate. And the reason I kind of put all that together was because real estate, huge impact on the environment, right? 40% of emissions. We spend 90% of our time indoors. So I knew that's where I wanted to focus. That led me to the US Green Building Council, which is where I met Dan. He was generally sprinting down the hallway from one meeting to another. And, kind of cut my chops there in terms of becoming a green building specialist. Wanted to focus more on like performance-based pathways as opposed to like a stamp as a certification in time. Wanted to focus more on how buildings perform. So moved on over to Measurable. Now I'm based in San Diego, which is where Measurable is based. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. Happy to be invited.
Thank you, Eric. And yes, we do have some Kren members in the audience. I already saw a couple of them. So
Nice.
send Eric a note if you happen to be, if you get a chance, and make sure you connect up with him. He's a fantastic resource for our students here at GW. He's always welcome to take calls from students. Next on my squares is Jim Lindau from MetLife Investment. And Jim has also been helping the center and the courses this semester. He's been working with our development case class. And Jim, you want to talk about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. Thanks for having me as well. So Jim Landau, I work for MetLife Investment Management here in our DC office. MetLife Global Insurance Company, MetLife Investment Management is the arm that manages MetLife's money, over $600 billion balance sheet. And that gets, directed to public fixed income and private placements, infrastructure debt, capital markets, et cetera. And some of it goes to real estate, which is where I am. On the real estate side, we have about a $125 billion portfolio. The majority of that is debt. We put out about 13 to $15 billion of new commercial mortgage originations each year. And we carry our own books, so about $75 billion, loan management program. And we've got about $25+ billion of equity. Of that includes, quite a few buckets of money, separate account clients, JV partners, core funds that we've created, et cetera. The equity is all US based. So I was an asset manager for a long time. And in around 2006 or so, which is maybe 4 years after Dan discovered the world of green real estate. So I don't know where I was at those 4 years, but things like LEED and Energy Star started to hit, our radar. And for me, it was really a new development of a suburban office building in Germantown, Maryland. And all of a sudden we started to ask ourselves, do we need to do this LEED thing? And we didn't really know much about it, honestly. And I just want to point out that was 16 years ago. And some of the students on the call may think 16 years is a long time, but it is remarkable how the world has changed, over the last 15, plus years. So I realized pretty quickly that this seemed to be something that, would both satisfy my, instinct to, want to change the world, but also that it might be and have legs for the real estate industry. And so I got involved. And after years of both my former company, Bentall Kennedy, which is now Bentall Greeno, and then MetLife, where I've been for 8 years, continuing as an asset manager, running our Mid-Atlantic region, but essentially in my spare time running our ESG program. About a year and a half ago, that became a full-time job with our first head of ESG. And largely it's because of the way the industry has grown. Our investors, our partners, our clients, both internally and externally, now want to talk about what we're doing from a sustainability or ESG perspective, as much as they want to talk about our strategy in terms of what type of asset classes and markets and ROIs we're looking at, which is remarkable. And it required somebody being in a full-time role. So essentially, that's been my journey.
Well, that's terrific. And again, his journey is what a lot of us have lived through. And it's so great to hear you are a CESG. I guess that's what it would be. Chief Executive of ESG, CEE.
I don't know if I'm a chief anywhere outside of this room that I'm sitting, but we.
That's fantastic. No, to me, that is and again, that's what we're going to be talking about today on this panel, but it's just been the growth and the increasing influence that ESG is playing on decision making and the importance of it. So to me, that's fantastic. And I think Alyssa has a story to tell us that's going to kind of go with that as well. Alyssa, and I hope I get it right. Pasili? I hope I forgot to ask you. Is it Pasili?
Really, but that's
Okay.
close enough. I've learned.
Thank you.
Anything, don't worry about it.
Thank you. And she joins us from Jones Lang LaSalle in a new position as well.
Glad to be here, everyone. Thanks, Elaine.
Oh, so we're having trouble hearing you. You
We're
might wanna
having trouble
get
hearing you,
closer to
Alyssa.
the mic or something.
Okay, is this
There you
better?
go. Perfect.
Okay,
Thank
sorry.
you.
Yeah, I had to switch computers last minute, technical difficulty. So thank you for bearing with me.
No worries.
My name's Alyssa Piccirilli. As Elaine mentioned, I'm a sustainability and ESG project manager at JLL. Also, I'm a proud GW alumni. I graduated with my MBA from GW in 2019.
Can people mute?
Okay, it just sounds like someone needs to mute, not that you can't hear me. I wasn't sure.
No, you're right. Somebody needs to mute. I'll get them.
Okay, no problem. All right, so I graduated from GW with my MBA in 2019. And my background in real estate actually comes from being a property manager. So I had worked as a property manager for about 9 years as I pursued my MBA part-time for 3 of those years. And when I was focused on my MBA, I was looking at corporate responsibility and sustainability issues and pursuing that certificate path. And when I thought, okay, I want to move into the impact space, I was trying to figure out how to do a career pivot, thought, what do I know about? And I thought, okay, I know about mechanical rooms. I know about property management. I know about real estate. And really through my coursework and some other conversations I had with GW alumni, I was able to move also to the US Green Building Council, where both Dan and Eric began as well. Worked on lead certifications for 2 years and then moved to a full-time ESG consulting firm where I used Measurable to report to GRES. So it all comes full circle. Also working on annual ESG reports and overall ESG consulting for investment managers. And all of those experiences are how I ended up in my current role at JLL, the corporate real estate services firm, where I work on green and healthy building certifications, as well as overall ESG portfolio strategy for real estate clients.
Terrific. Thank you very much, everybody. So as you can see, we pulled together an incredible group of people. And we really hope that we'll get some questions from you and that you'll learn a lot from their, literally their life experiences. We got about, well, I count 6 times 30 is 180 years worth of experience in this room. Well, I might have rounded you up a little bit, Eric, and you, Alyssa, but still, we've got a lot. So hopefully you'll take advantage of this and throw some questions their ways. What we're going to start with, though, because we're not entirely sure about the audience. Again, this is a program we started at the beginning of the semester. We'll be doing it, I think, most semesters, and it's the Think Tank Thursday, every 4th Thursday of the month. And, everybody's invited. Anybody is welcome to join us. And so what we've put together is just a quick question to see where everybody is on ESG. So can you roll the poll, Rob?
Poll is open.
Thank you. Wow. It's a mix. Okay, we have 22 out of 27. We got our speakers. Okay, we can go with that. All right. Whoops. Can you show the results?
So I don't know how to show it, but I can talk about it.
So can I. Go for it, Rob.
38%.
You made me co-host.
Yes, 38% are very confident in their knowledge. 33% were somewhat confident. 25% were not at all confident, and 1 person said, "What is ESG?"
So there we go. And my response to Zoom is, okay, I don't know how to use the poll stuff, but that's okay. But we got that answered. And again, that's what we were thinking. So Dan had volunteered to be the first speaker to kind of just define and lay the groundwork, since he has been working with this the longest, and he probably could do this in his sleep. So thank you very much, Dan. We're going to start with you.
Well, I'm gonna have help from my friends. I'm sure that I will leave
Absolutely.
some blanks here because ESG is a big tent of issues. And in my lead in, I tried to articulate the acronym: environmental, social, and governance. So what does that mean? Let's unpack that. And it's sort of the same thing. And we're talking about at an entity level, a company level, is where the capital markets tend to intersect with this notion of ESG. The other word that's been used so far is sustainability. And that's often talked about in real estate. And that gets you down to sort of the building level, which is where the building ratings have been: LEED and BREEAM and IRAM and Energy Star. So environmental, social, and governance. Let's unpack this a little bit. On the environmental side, these are the metrics that we're sort of used to and thinking about: energy, water, waste, greenhouse gas emissions. And the big question that GRESB did, and forgive me, I didn't do a good job of what GRESB is. It's LPs, the big institutional investors in the pension plans, asking the people that are in charge of their capital, what are you doing on sustainability? And so we've curated that conversation now for 12, 13 years around the globe. And so the idea is, can you elevate structured non-financial data that goes to inform how the financials came about? And let's do it looking at metrics. On the environmental side, we can map things. I talked about the big four. Let's talk about social. What are you doing for your company and the employees that are part of it, as well as what's happening with the tenants on the ground? Are you doing tenant surveys? Are there things that are happening that you're looking to do that have impact out there with the built environment and with your capital? And then on the governance side, our governance is really about, is there somebody at the firm who has budget clout and title, like Jim, at financial moments of truth, that are bringing these issues to fore, part of investment committee, part of ongoing asset management. And these are, ESG is often baked into everything within a firm. So therefore, it's a silo busting exercise. What are we doing? And ultimately, where this ends up are best practices. Best practices, administered globally for real estate companies. And what are you doing on these issues to propel things forward and deliver what investors want: risk-adjusted returns? So let me just stop there for a second. I think that outlines at a high level what ESG is, but I know it's going to mean something a little bit different to all of the panelists, as well as all of the people that have dialed in today. So Elaine, let me go back. Well, actually, I'm supposed to go back to Jim, aren't I? Jim, can you help me and sort of give a little bit more perspective and pile in here?
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. So, look, one of the themes that we talked about, before the session was kind of the difference between bottom up and top down, and I want to start there a little bit. So, when we started to talk about sustainability, because before it was ESG, it was responsible property investing, and that kind of morphed into sustainability. Now it's ESG. It's really all the same thing, but from our perspective, at least, it was very much driven at the property level by the developer or by the property manager, and local teams were trying to figure out how to be more energy efficient, and really it was all about energy efficiency, for some time, and that's grown. Obviously, water and waste are also important. But, just over the last number of years, the tracking carbon and emissions have become, really more the focus of what we're talking about. And they're driven by energy use. But, so the conversation's gotten more sophisticated. And as it's gotten more sophisticated, there's been more of a need to approach this from more of a top-down, basis, if you will. That also coincides with advances in property technology, prop tech, and platforms like GRESB and like Measurable that look at portfolios, because it's with these tools that we can really employ bottom-up solutions and assess them from a top-down basis. And then if we then want to go further and submit to tools and benchmarks like GRES, you really need that across the board reporting and information gathering technology and capabilities. So now that said, the bottom up aspect is still critically important. At the end of the day, I sit in an office in Washington, D.C., and we've got 7 regional offices around the U.S., other regional offices around the country, around the world, in terms of our debt program. But I will rarely visit many of the assets that we own. And we've got very good people, property managers, chief engineers, from the top companies like Cushman & Wakefield and CBRE and JLL and Bozzuto and Greystar and many others that are running these properties. They need to have flexibility. They understand how their property operates. And to some extent, from this top-down basis, we can offer them support. Dan mentioned budget. We can offer, we can approve budgets for programs, but it's really this combination of people on the ground understanding their product and suggesting how to improve it. And then, top down, putting programs in place to enable them to do it and us to assess it. And I think I'll stop there, Elaine.
Okay, great, Jim. That's good. And again, this whole idea of it moving to the top is a huge shift. I mean, this just has happened in really the last, well, probably 3 to 4 years, and with COVID, it really seems to have just like escalated. And I think Evans kind of lived through a lot of this as it's moved through, and it's now becoming some requirements in terms of reporting and things like that. And Evans Group has been doing work in this area. So Evan, do you want to kind of take your turn at talking about how ESG and your company is viewing it and what's going to be important going forward? And again, one of the things we're trying to do with this panel is give you some direction on what you need to be focused on, what's hot, and then some of the things you might not have to worry so much about. So I know Evan's been working in this area for a bit now. Evan, with his company.
Yes. So like I said before, we're a private but fairly large company that does a lot of work for ourselves, but then also for others. And so I'm gonna describe briefly how ESG impacts each of our divisions, and then also a little bit about what our corporate how we think about it corporately, internally, and then also just a couple other tidbits of information that have actually, some of which have just come across my desk in the past week since we spoke. So it is
moving fast.
rapidly changing.
Life is moving fast. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Evan.
So from a development perspective, where I spend most of my time, it's really gone from, as Dan mentioned, leads starting in 99 or 2000 or so. When I was in grad school at GW, I studied for the lead exam, and I got my lead accredited professional accreditation, I suppose, which at the time was all you could get. And now, there's all sorts of different parts to it where you could focus in a specific area. But the point of that is that at the time, these were all new things in development. And so when I built an office building at that time, a green roof was, something no one had ever done. People worried about whether the roof would leak, whether the plants would live. Do you have to water the green roof, which is the complete opposite of what you'd, put it up there for? And now when you think about things like green roofs, solar, rain gardens, these are all things that if you don't do them, you're not even going to meet code in a jurisdiction like DC. So things that we were thinking about doing in an innovative way 10, 15 years ago are now just standard. If you hire an architect to design a building, that's just coming with it. And the things that are newer now are things, at least for us, we're going to be doing a mass timber building. So, we've never done one. They're pretty rare around here. We just traveled out to Oregon a few weeks ago to look at a bunch of them where they're much more common. And there's
Do you want to define mass timber? Some of the audience might not know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
sure. So a mass timber building is a building that, rather being built out of concrete or steel or even 2x4s, is built out of what's called cross-laminated timber, where you take and layer thinner pieces of wood together, and they're actually glued together in various thicknesses depending on the span. And then you can either do it with wood columns, or you could do it laid on top of a more traditional wood wall system. So the one we're going to do right now will be a traditional wood wall system with wooden slabs. So the inside, and this will be an apartment building. So the inside of the unit, you look up at the ceiling as you walk in, and it'll be completely exposed, beautiful wood throughout the unit. And, we're doing it for a variety of reasons. One, the carbon capture. Two, the aesthetic is just totally different than anything else in the market. Normally in an apartment building, you'd either have an exposed concrete ceiling, which was sort of the 10-year ago cool thing to do, and then you'd have a drywall ceiling. So those are your two main options. This is going to be very different. It's got a biophilic quality, so people really enjoy being in the space. And so at any rate, that's just one example of something that we're doing differently now. A question popped up about fire rating. So the code right now in DC requires a code modification to do a mass timber building. But these things are all vetted. Wood, what you do on a fire rating is you actually build it slightly thicker than you would need to allow the wood to char and maintain its structural properties. So, and it actually holds up much better than, another kind of material, steel or concrete. So it seems counterintuitive, but it actually holds up better in a fire than those ones do. So at any rate, I want to move on because I wanted to cover a few other things, but not take so long. So on the construction side, we have our own construction company. We build 80% of our projects for other people, 20% for ourselves. And again, that in construction, if you are going for LEED or some other designation, the things that were common early on, were recycling of materials, where do you get your materials, and so forth. And I think now the construction companies are so used to doing that it's the same thing. You're just going to get that. You don't have to ask the contractor anymore to track where they're sourcing their materials or how much they're recycling or any of that. It's just all standard. And they're very used to those kinds of requirements, either from the jurisdiction or the developer themselves. On the hotel side, something that happened recently, which is a bit of a political conundrum, is if you've been to a hotel in the past 5 years, you probably see a little sign that says, help the environment by not asking for your towels to be changed, on a daily basis, or your sheets or whatever, to conserve water. Well, just in the past 2 weeks, DC government has passed legislation pushed by the unions forcing the hotel owner to clean the room on a daily basis. And the reason for that is because during COVID, the staff was cut down so far because the occupancies were so low that you wouldn't clean the room every day because, one, people didn't want you in the room with COVID, and two, you just didn't have the staff. And now, and plus it's environmentally better. And now, because people's hours were cut, the unions are pushing on council people and the mayors to, and this has been done in other cities as well, to force a daily cleaning. And so it's just a very interesting counterintuitive kind of thing. It makes sense
Yeah.
from a labor perspective, I suppose, but from everything else perspective, doesn't make much sense.
Right. Mhm.
On the real estate side, in terms of property management, I'll just echo Jim in that the property managers are really looking out for the buildings. They have to meet certain criteria in different cities now over time, or else you'll actually be fined if you don't meet certain Energy Star and other requirements. So there's that. And then from our facilities management standpoint, a lot of what we're trying to do for different owners now is the first thing you want to do is you want to do an energy audit. Most buildings don't even understand where they are compared to other buildings. And that's the easiest way to figure out where you are and then have a recommended list of what you can do to improve the building. And then from a corporate standpoint, at Donahoe, we're focused on all that environmental stuff, but then also on the social side, we have certain goals internally for new hiring, and doing it in a more holistic and diverse way. We have a fairly diverse team as it is compared to some other companies because of the diversity of our businesses. But it is something that you have to be cognizant of all the time. And then finally, one of the things that came across just the other day from our insurance person internally was that some of our insurance carriers are actually looking at ESG metrics now during their underwriting. So your rates on your insurance policies might change depending on how well you're doing with ESG. So I'll leave it at that for now. And
Great. Fantastic. That was a good swing through the whole company and a lot of the different ways that you're trying to work with ESG and how it's changing so dramatically. I think we'll take the opportunity now to go to Alyssa because Alyssa's she's working for a large real estate company and helping lots of different people in terms of their investments and also their strategies. So Alyssa, why don't you talk a little bit about what what JLL is really providing and some of the trends you're seeing that we need to be paying attention to?
Sure. Well, one thing I would echo is the top-down approach. I think I would say actually historically for JLL, working with a lot of corporate occupier and investor clients, what we would think of with sustainability and sort of JLL's role in sustainability was really looking at building certifications on an individual building or individual fit out level. And now part of the reason that we're growing, we're really expanding to help clients on a more holistic or portfolio level approach and really working with clients of all types of corporate occupiers and investors to help them embed ESG practices, sustainability throughout that entire real estate life cycle. So whether it's helping them outline design and construction guidelines from a sustainability perspective through to helping corporate occupier clients with a more holistic portfolio level green leasing or site selection strategy, all the way through to helping consult on data collection methods. So for clients reporting to GRES that are looking for technologies and better methods to help report to GRES and collect that data. So we're seeing actually a lot of requests from clients to help at a more portfolio level rather than just at the individual building or individual site level. So that's a big shift, I think, also for our team and our business. And then another big takeaway I would say for us is really on the social piece. That's a big piece of what we're seeing. I think particularly COVID has accelerated a lot of concerns around indoor air quality, healthy buildings, and making sure that people feel comfortable and safe within the buildings that they occupy. So when we think about green building certification, and that's tended to be the term we've used, we've talked a lot about LEED tonight, which is Leadership for Energy and Environmental Design. That was sort of the foundation of certifications and a lot of the green building movement, which was focused similarly to Energy Star, very heavily on managing and reporting on efficiency and sort of how was the building performing and how efficient was the building. And now with COVID, we've seen really a massive explosion in healthy building certifications such as WELL and FitWell. And those certifications are focused a little bit more on the occupant experience. So more focus on indoor air quality, healthy food management, cleaning practices, so that people feel more comfortable within the space and that the buildings are healthier. So that's probably one of the biggest shifts we're seeing, is that there's a huge push on social in terms of the ESG within certifications, but as well as just within generally a focus for our corporate occupier clients in particular on bringing people back into their spaces. So whether that's retail, hotels, office spaces, is how are we drawing people back into those buildings and really being able to focus on some of those well-being certifications and other indoor air quality and sustainability attributes that focus on social is a big push for clients hoping to bring people back in to use their real estate. So I think that's a huge takeaway we're seeing in the industry.
Great. Good. So with that, I want to pivot actually to John, because the social aspect of ESG has a lot of different potential definitions. And I think you've described one of them, Alyssa, as far as the actual environment that the people are working in. But John's looking at a whole nother area, and that is the impact of basically some funding to help society and actually have an impact in terms of changing some of the situations that people have gotten into over time. So John, can you spend some time talking about your product or your fund? And again, one of the cool things I think about John's fund is it really does, there's another term that gets thrown around out there right now, and that's impact investing. And that impact investing, the idea is that you're making a profit, but you're also making a difference in terms of what you're doing with the company or the money, et cetera. So John's got this fund that I think just hits the nail on the head in terms of what he's trying to do. So John, can you spend some time talking about that?
Sure. Happy to cover, and I'll, we'll try to be brief, but as Alyssa mentions, that, the S in ESG covers many perspective areas. So things like workforce development, gender equality, poverty, hunger, education, et cetera. We tend to focus on issues of affordable housing ownership, and in particular for us, single family. And we accomplish that by attacking this huge, largely unaddressed market of predatory seller finance products. Think products like that you may have heard of, like land contracts or contracts for deed, predatory forms of lease purchase agreements, essentially alternative, generally seller financed alternatives to traditional mortgages. And they tend to be problematic for lots of reasons, but among them, that more often than not, they tend to be overpriced. They tend to not often result in buyers actually assuming ownership of their properties. They tend to have very few consumer protections. And they generally sell a very false promise that most consumers don't realize until they are on the wrong end of it. And so what our company does is buy large pools of properties that are encumbered by predatory forms of seller financing. And we work with the families that occupy them to convert them into traditional mortgages. And by doing that, what we do is to dramatically lower their costs. So we're generally reducing interest rates. If I look in our existing portfolio, most of the interest rates were 10% or above before we converted their mortgages into ones that are mid to low single digits. If I look in our pipeline, we have interest rates as high as 18 and 20% for folks who are on the wrong end of those contracts. We also transfer equity to those homeowners. So, and to be clear, these are generally smaller balanced properties. So think $75,000 or less. It's disproportionately low income, low and moderate income, and minority families that are affected by it. But it's a huge industry. It's a more than $200 billion industry. There are tens of millions of families that are affected by it. More than 5% of all single family properties that are owned in the country are actually financed with some variation of a product like that. So, and it's largely unaddressed by the government. This is largely unregulated at the federal level, subject to a patchwork of state level regs. So the quick nexus I'll make to points that were made earlier by Jim and Evan in particular are the way that you see the standards and the expectations around this evolving into ones that were at first, kind of fringe and optional, and then just very quickly becoming kind of a standard expectation. We happen to be in the middle of capital raising right now. So we've closed 2 rounds of funding, and we are planning for a final close during the third quarter of this year. And I'd say the sort of range of capital players has been varied. We have foundations, large institutions, private family offices, as well as a category called DAFs that you all may be familiar with. But what I would say is and DAFs are donor advised funds. It's
Okay.
basically a tax advantaged way of making investment contributions. And I would say that, kind of the common vein amongst the groups that we're talking to is this sort of, to some degree, uncompromising expectation of a compelling financial return associated with a compelling social impact driven return. And so increasingly amongst the private players, you see this. You see family offices who have, in some cases, specifically oriented themselves to align their wealth with their values to drive toward those sorts of outcomes. You see foundations that have come up with this sort of new category of investments entirely, where previously the sort of endowment side of their house would have been the more traditional institutional investing, and their program related investment, PRI side, would have been their more mission oriented, but really more charitable, think grants and that sort of thing. Now you see more of a hybrid sort of category, MRIs, mission related investments that have emerged. And so you see this sort of expectation amongst the capital markets players where there is an increasing expectation that you are finding ways to create impact on some front through your work. So I'll stop there.
That's terrific. Thank you. No, and I do think that we appreciate that all of you have said how quickly things are changing and shifting and merging and not. Last but certainly not least, Erica, like he mentioned, has been working with one of the largest groups trying to measure all this stuff. So Eric, you want to spend some time talking about how you guys, your basic stuff, but then the new stuff you're doing and kind of where you're going as a company.
Yeah.
Tied to all this discussion.
Tied to all, I'll wrap it all up.
Yeah. We got more questions, but yeah, you wrap up this first round.
Cool. No, I mean, it works well with why Measurable even exists. And it is because of this transition from sustainability, what we used to call sustainability and green, to ESG. And mirroring that is this transition everyone's talking about from operational efficiencies, oh, cool, you can save money on energy, you can save money on water, to what Dan had said, risk-adjusted returns, right? Like it is much more about risk management now because, climate change, as far as the E is concerned, is, the biggest risk imaginable for real estate in terms of hurricanes, sea level rise, floods, things like that. But then also regulation. We talked about regulations that are coming down. Local Law 97 in New York is going to hand out some hefty fines for carbon emissions, the SEC disclosures. So that's why it shifted from the individual building level to the portfolio or the fund level, because it's now about, risk, managing your risk. That answer is dominated by the E. And in terms of measuring the E of ESG, G is very important, obviously. Without governance and policies, that's a huge risk. And S, huge reputational risk, right? Like if you are shown to have done some things that maybe aren't the best socially for the communities that you're active in. But in terms of measurable and kind of what we measure, it's because of that portfolio level need to report on your data. And so by data, by and large, we mean here energy, water, waste, carbon emissions. There's also things like physical risk exposure. So how exposed are your buildings to sea level rise, hurricanes, floods, drought? And then that S piece is the trickier part. And I think the conversation's kind of coalescing around that, as it's hard to measure. It's definitely, if we want to stick with the theme, one of the hotter pieces of ESG right now, because that is what people are asking for. So yeah.
Great. So let's pivot a little bit here, because we did have a question, which I thought was a very good question. It was for Dan originally, and he did give a pretty good background on it. But do you want to expand a little bit more, Dan? So in case people can't read your answer. And the question was from Howard, and it basically says about, are there best practice frameworks or guidances for LPs trying to figure out what to do? And, do you want to spend a little bit of time on that?
Well, it's a loaded question there from our
I
founding
know.
member, right? So here's the history. Is back in 2009, APG, along with two other groups, PGGM and USS, really big fiduciaries for pension capital, they got together and they commissioned some academics to come up with a due diligence questionnaire. What are all of our fund managers doing when it comes to sustainability? And so that required a tailored approach. Let's think about all of the various issues under E, S, and G that touch institutional real estate. And it was the hunt for better. That's what I like to say is, what did people want? They wanted better. So good, better, best. When you look at GRESB, there's roughly 50 questions in this framework, with the most difficult being, can you acquire the energy, water, waste, and greenhouse gas emission data for this portfolio? But besides this, there's another 49 questions. And the simple one, do you have a ESG policy? I don't know, do we? And then that was the question to the Donahos of the world. I'm just picking on Evan because he's here, right? But to anybody that received this due diligence questionnaire, and then people would have to look around. Well, do we? I don't know. Let's go talk to legal. Let's ask marketing. What is this? And they'd find out that there were some things about environmental. So we have that. And then social, maybe governance. I don't know, right? And then what it looks like is good, better, best. Do you have this? Yes or no? And then if so, environmental is great, social is better, and all three is best. What we ask for is then you have to upload that document. So there's a trust but verify component also to GRESB. So the framework that has been developed over time, it started initially with the academics kind of laying out the groundwork. It was developed in an ISO 14001 approach. Is there a plan? What are you doing? Is there a mechanism to kind of see what has happened over time and then to continue to make progress and track those things? So plans come out in lots of different ways. I talked about a policy, but another, sort of a plan, do, check, act is targets. Do you have an energy reduction target? Do you have a watt reduction target? Do you have a GHG reduction target? Asking those questions of a fund manager on an annual basis, first question is, or the first answer, the initial is, well, gee, we have a return target. We have an IRR and an NPV target. I didn't realize we should have one of these GHG targets. When they get their benchmark report back every October, all of a sudden they're peered up against others who, they either feel like they're the same or they compete with or whatever it is, you're peered up. And all of a sudden you see a breakout. Hey, look, 20, 30, 50% of my peers have this target, and it prompts questions internally. Should we? Could we? How would we? And so that's what happens with the GPs. Now, the LPs that APG is part of, they're making investments. So they have existing book of investments, but they're also making new allocations. They are looking for best in class. So the big idea here that either the GRESB or LEED or these ratings, what it's really prompted is where social responsibility, and Jim brought this up before, the acronyms have changed, but the ideas are the same. Back in when this first started, it was more exclusion. These are some bad things that we don't want. right?
Mhm.
Guns, tobacco, child labor, there's a long list. And it's morphed and it's moved to looking for best in class. So the GRES framework has received countless thousands of hours of input from the Jim Landows of the world on the GP side and the APGs and others that make up our governance committees. And it has continued to evolve over time. And where we are in 2022 is we're looking ahead and thinking, what are the issues of our time? In the past, it's been that bugaboo, can you acquire the energy, water, waste? And Eric talked about how that's led to the rise of immeasurable. Looking ahead, it's climate, COVID, and carbon, where COVID is a code word for the S, right? It's squishy, it's difficult sometimes to measure these things.
Just like COVID is.
I know, but
COVID keeps trying to decide where it wants to go.
I love what John is doing, right? Because it's okay. We have LPs that want to give capital, but it's, yes, we want those returns. It's not return or the various social things that are happening on the impact side. It's return and it's both. We want both. And the fact that people are delivering it is amazing. And it's driving progress throughout the entire industry, to get to what Evan was talking about, which is, yeah, these things that were novel and nuanced back 15 years ago, standard now. That's where this is all going.
Great. Any of the other panelists want to comment on Dan's comments? Or should we keep going? Because I have a question, and it's comes from some of the things that Evan was saying. And then I know some of you work on a more national/international basis. And because I know Evan, here in DC, there's lots of code and there's lots of forced legislature kind of things happening in the district. But is that true across the country and across the world? I mean, it's pretty variable, isn't it? If you're not working in a few markets where it's become kind of accepted, if you're not working in the gateway communities. I mean, if you think about some of the communities John's working in, is it really, people know what they're doing in terms of, like, say, contractors, say Clemson, South Carolina, as an example? Or do most of you just work in too much? I know most of you are in the institutional world, but does anybody have any comments on that in terms of how different it is?
It's certainly different.
When you move across.
It's certainly different in different parts of the country. I can't say I'm an expert in all the different places, but just as an example, here in DC and a lot of the other, at least coastal cities or East and West Coast, most of the cities have pretty stringent codes and zoning and everything else. And then, friends of mine that work in Texas, certain cities have absolutely they don't even have zoning.
Yeah, right.
So you can literally build whatever you want, wherever you want.
Exactly.
And at any time. So I would say the answer is no, it is not common everywhere to have these kinds of rules and standards.
Yeah, anybody else want to comment on that?
I can chime in just in the sense of, yeah, definitely regulation, right, is going to be centered in kind of the markets that we've all talked about at DC, Boston, New York, things like that. There's obviously a lot of regulation coming out of Europe, which also, affects the money that comes from Europe. And then you also look at, large pension funds and things like that, where the money comes from, investors are asking for it. So even if you're in a place where there's not regulation or code to build a certain way, you're still going to be required by your investors to report on the performance. And that performance can be really bad. But basically, I think what that's creating is kind of a scale, right? Of, it's no longer, is this building green, yes or no? It's, how is this building performing well or poorly? And there's every little, dot on that graph is going to be filled by a building in a different jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
Elaine, I could expand just a
Sure.
little further.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, as everybody said, yes, there are cities like New York, Boston, DC, St. Louis, Denver, Montgomery County, Maryland, the state of Washington, that have adopted what we call BEPS laws, or Building Energy Performance Standards laws, and some focus on energy performance and some on emissions, like New York and Boston focus on emissions. We believe that some sort of a similar law is going to arrive at probably every major primary and even secondary city, over the next 10 years. So it's not, I would say it's not going to remain a coastal thing. Okay. It's really expanding everywhere. It goes beyond that though. So that's legislation. Eric mentioned, the regulation that's come out of Europe, and that's here. EU climate law includes a thing called SFDR, or the Sustainability Finance Disclosure Regulations. If you have, as we do, US assets in a fund that has European investors, or you're marketing in Europe, you need to be in compliance with SFDR. And the goalpost has changed a few times, but it's currently January 2023, including reporting data as of July 2022. That's in about 2 months.
Yeah, it's
So-
not very far away.
No, we're here, and we're scrambling right now. We're working with a London-based firm to get our funds into compliance, well before the deadline. In addition, here in the U.S., the SEC promised, starting over a year ago, that they were going to introduce new regulations for public companies. They kept delaying it, but they did release them about a month ago, and we're currently in the middle of a 60-day comment period, and many firms like mine are quickly put together task forces, working groups to figure out how we're going to comment, as are all major industry groups in the U.S. And we're part of a couple of those as well. So that top-down nature of both legislation and regulation is coming fast and furious, and regardless of if you're a 10 or 25,000 square foot building or larger, regardless of
You're
where
part
you're
of it.
located, you're going to be impacted.
Alyssa, do you have any comments on this, given your world?
Sure. Yeah, I think I would echo what everyone has said, but absolutely another thing we would point to is the development with the International Sustainability Standards Board. So I think standardization in reporting is something that is another hot trend in this industry. So alongside the SEC regulation, the SEC regulations are based really on some existing frameworks. And those frameworks are also being worked into the new recommendations from the International Sustainability Standards Board, which essentially is a sister organization to the International Accounting Standards Board. So for those of you familiar with GAAP, or basically the accounting, right, what governs the accounting's financial statements, they're developing something very similar for sustainability. So I think increasingly so for both private and public companies, we'll see more of a standardization. I think, as Eric pointed out, for public companies, it may be, by decree, by law, but for private companies, I think a lot of that will be by investor pressure. Once a new standard for reporting is out there, and that's a new industry norm, I think investors will just expect to receive that information and receive it in that same format. So I think that's a huge trend that we're seeing, which is that standardization. And then to Dan's point on due diligence questionnaires, I would say, having worked with some of my clients, the way we're seeing some of those questions coming through from investors has been dramatically more and more specific. Even in the past year, I had, for example, one client that had an investor ask a more generic question about a year ago, saying, do you have a net zero commitment? And like many companies, you say, not at this time, but we're certainly continuing to evaluate this and we'll see. And then just a few months later, same investor comes back with an updated questionnaire that now says, basically, why don't you have? If you don't have a net zero commitment, why not? And when can what's your pathway to get there? When can we expect it? And if you were asked today about net zero, what would be your position? So I think some of this deferral or non-answers for private companies in particular is just no longer going to be an option. So
Can't kick the can down the road anymore. Kind of nice to see, actually. You guys are making me laugh about the net zero and the green roof, because I was working at Clemson University about 10 years ago, and we got this brand new building. It was going to be gorgeous, and we marketed it as net zero. It's going to be fantastic. And then we ran out of money, and so it was net zero ready. We had to change all our marketing to say net zero ready because we couldn't afford that green roof. But eventually, I think they have put it on. But it was pretty funny because it was like, that's doing it. Then, woo, maybe not, because it got too expensive. Go
All
ahead.
buildings are net zero ready if you look at them the right way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was very clever to say it that way. But I thought, go ahead, Evan. What were you going to say?
I had a funny story. I guess about when I was right out of grad school. One of the at the time the most sustainable buildings were being commissioned by nonprofits because they weren't looking at the returns on the building, and so this particular nonprofit, the design included windmills on little ones on the roof. And so we started looking at the wind study for that area and found out that it wasn't the most windy corridor. And my boss at the time said, "Oh, don't worry about that. If the windmills aren't going, we'll just power those babies up."
Oh, that's great. Hey, so we're gonna pivot a little bit here because we got a question for John, which I think is a good one for everybody. This one comes from Leanne, who it's Leanne Tobias, who actually has worked with us here at GW as well, and she's worked in this area also for the last 30 years. And her question was, John, what you're doing is fantastic. Is there a way to maybe scale it up and particularly to multifamily? Leanne, do I have that right? That's kind of what you're asking about, right? Maybe? I read it fast.
I think so.
Yeah. Can you
So-
talk about scaling, John?
Yeah, we'll absolutely speak to it. And Leanne, if I misinterpret anything, please feel free to jump in. So what I would say is, the challenge, at least in the model that we execute in directly extending it today in a city like DC to multifamily, is that the basis is so extraordinarily high that the capacity for us to execute our fund in a way that is market driven, and by market driven I mean that the risk adjusted returns that we're able to provide to our investors while still allowing favorable economics for the families that are involved and not involving third party subsidy it's an untenable challenge, right? That the TOPA laws create a capacity and an opportunity for tenants to organize and to be able to purchase, but the basis is set by third party, either refinance terms, but more typically by market clearing prices from a fully socialized marketing process. And that generally is not going to allow for enough of an opportunity for third parties to come in, provide equity in a way. I say to provide equity, but that's not quite what we do. To explain our model a little more fully than I did before, and I'll try to do it quickly, is we buy large pools of properties that are encumbered by predatory forms of seller finance. We buy them at meaningful discounts. And then we work with the families to convert those contracts into traditional mortgages. The mortgages we will then hold in season for a period of time to demonstrate payment performance to the markets, and then sell in the secondary markets. As a function of tying to the point of regulations that we were just talking about, the environment today is such that many of these predatory contracts are the discounts that are available on properties encumbered in some cases by these are on performing pools of these are steeper than the discounts that are available on non-performing pools of mortgages. So we create a meaningful value by virtue of the mortgages. There's a lot of yeoman's effort involved with doing that. But we create value inherently, and because we're able to buy at such meaningful discounts. And to put a really fine point on this, if you look, there's a really interesting case in New York that happened that was settled just last year. this sort of last incarnation of these predatory products, these contracts for deed in particular, really there was a huge resurgence after the global financial crisis. And some of the large players found themselves on the wrong end of regulators' crosshairs over the last few years. What happened in New York was unique and interesting, that one of the bad actors was involved in the settlement involving the AG. What was interesting and unique was that not only did they suffer financial penalties associated with it, but they were also forced to transfer title to all of those properties to the families for no additional consideration, right? Which is pretty
Wow.
outcome in our industry that just doesn't happen. That operator is restricted from doing business in New York, in the state of New York again. And not only did they penalize the operator, but they reached through and penalized the hedge fund investors that were backing them, right? That's a unique constellation of activities. And so, as you would expect, as a function of that, it created a real chilling effect on that sort of market. So many of the folks that had that sort of product, especially with a similar business model, were seeking to sell. In addition to the fact that many of them were at a sort of natural point in their sales cycle anyway. They were, in many cases, 7 to 10 years out from when they had amassed these portfolios. So more of a motive to sell, but also a chilled environment for would-be buyers. So what we're taking advantage of is a sort of unique displacement in the market that lets us pick up this product at a steep discount and then be able to operate in a way that we think is providing the sort of outcomes that the families, as well as the regulators, and as well as our investors are seeking. We're making actual homeowners, we're reducing their payments, and our portfolio monthly P&I payments are going down on average by about 40%.
Wow.
That are involved. We're transferring equity to families on average about $40,000 per family. For these families who are low and moderate income, that's a more than 10x increase in their net worth on average. And to the extent that a family's underwater, we're eliminating the negative equity, and we're still able to do that in a way that allows us to return to low double digits. We're a target net 11 to 13 IRR to our investors. So to quickly get back to your point, it's tough for us to approach the sort of risk-adjusted returns that we think would be required of investors for a non-subsidized strategy on market clearing price or fully socialized, multifamily deal in a city like DC, because that sort of discounted basis just isn't available to us. Does that hopefully answer your question?
That helps. Yeah, I think it's a great answer. I think that what motivated my question is having worked very briefly in the affordable sector. I thought it was a shame that TOPA was working really well to transfer properties into the hands of and is working extremely well to transfer properties into the hands of affordable developers, which is fabulous. But what I did notice as well was that none of the value enhancement was flowing to the tenants whose association created that opportunity for the developer. There were some things done, like resident services and at times special job training programs or whatever for residents, but never did residents or the tenants association get a meaningful participation in the project. So that's where my question came from.
No, I absolutely agree. And having been involved in several TOPA deals, no dispute at all of the observation. What I'd say more broadly is, if you look at the wealth, not just the wealth gap, if you look at the home ownership gap in our country today, the racial gap in home ownership today is higher than it's been at any point since the 19th century. Right. And then if you look at home ownership and its role in wealth creation, if you look at the sort of middle 80% of earners in the country, the principal residence constitutes more than 2/3 of the net worth for the median 8% of earners. And so to the extent that you don't own or have an opportunity to own, your opportunity to make any meaningful progress on closing the wealth gap or finding ways to help families to establish a foundation for generational wealth building is significantly encumbered. So yeah, it's a huge problem, and that wealth tends to, when it's created, even by affordable strategies, tends to be transferred, generally to the developers. That's not necessarily wrong. It just, I would say that it's incomplete, and so that there have to be solutions that provide affordable housing in ways that are able to provide at least a pathway to providing some of those benefits to families as well, because we find ourselves in the late innings of an extended growth cycle where not only materials but labor costs have made the cost of producing real estate in general extremely expensive, but certainly for affordable housing. And so most solutions tend to focus on multifamily and rental because they're easier to solve, but they also tend to generally involve subsidy. And so at the same time, we have a huge naturally occurring stock of affordable housing that, unfortunately, because of a lack of financing, the properties that are worth the least don't cost the least. And so there's a disinvestment in those homes, in those communities, and the problem's exacerbated. So we think that it's an important arrow to have in the quiver to be able to have solutions that help to finance those sorts of properties.
That's great, John.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. And I guess I'm just going to make a quick aside that just to see, oh gosh, I can't make my picture come up with you guys. I want to see you all. Oh, well, never mind. Oh, I know. Here we go. I was looking at the chat big so I could make sure I picked up all the questions. But I want to just piggyback on that just for a second, John, to get your sense of, and anybody else on the call, what you think about the whole idea of buy to rent in terms of housing, just really quickly. You guys think it's a good idea or a bad idea, given John's just discussion about building net worth? I think I just gave my answer, but John, any comments?
Oh, for me, yeah, buy to rent or rent to buy?
The buy to rent, the whole push of institutional capital going in and buying all the single family homes to be rented. Yeah.
It's so.
Is that a good for our social or S in ESG?
Is it good for social? So I would say, the build to rent and the SFR, the large scale institutional SFR acquisition strategies certainly put a lot of pressure, especially on the sort of entry level price points that you find many of the would-be first time and move up buyers. And so I would say to that end, it presents a real challenge. I would say, at the same time, there are lots of models, that are out, some that provide shared equity, some that provide, kind of
great, yeah,
alternate ways to come in. I would say, the best way that I can characterize is that, I think we see those as incomplete solutions. So rather than to malign any particular one, I would say that, ultimately the ways to be able to address issues of housing affordability it will need to be a spectrum of solutions to be able to solve, because there's not, in the same ways that, none of the people on the call have situations that are the same, the solutions won't be the same. But I would say those sorts of rental acquisition strategies definitely put upward pricing pressure, definitely undermine some of the intensity around the focus of providing solutions around mortgages for borrowers at that end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and bringing it back to the S conversation, I mean, it in my mind, at least, it starts to really impact that S, particularly for people, the younger generation, for the folks that are trying to get into housing, and it makes it more expensive, could potentially make it more expensive as it creates a competitive market and pushes prices up, which then again, we all know the drive to qualify thing, right? It kind of pushes people out so that they can afford to live as rents have pushed up. And so we're kind of like potentially going backwards in some of the things we've been trying to do. But anyways, we are almost out of time. So we have 6 minutes left, which means we have time for one quick round, and you get 1 minute each. And basically, and I'm gonna time you. No, I won't. But let's try to keep it to a minute, because that's literally what we have. And I want you to give the one thing that you think is super hot, and one term or thing that you think people can maybe not have to pay so much attention to. And let's start with the youngest this time. So I believe Eric, or at least he's the more recent grad. So we'll start with Eric, and Eric, you can pass the baton to whoever you want.
All
We're
right.
doing a relay.
I'll try to do it in a minute.
Do it in a minute
so
and pass the baton.
what's hot in ESG? I think data is hot in ESG. And what do I mean by that, right? You can't manage what you can't measure. My CEO made promise that I was going to say that once in this presentation. And you're not going to be able to respond to investor questionnaires. You're not going to be able to comply with regulation unless you have data that backs up your claims. Data around how much energy you're using, how much water you're using, how much carbon you're putting into the atmosphere, what projects you're undertaking to reduce that carbon, what projects you're undertaking to affect the community around you. So data. And then lastly, what do I think is not what people can forget about? This might be controversial. I think people can forget about carbon offsets. I don't think they are as an effective tool as people think they are. It's my own personal belief. But if I have an overflowing bathtub and I dump a bucket of water in it, and I said, don't worry, I took a bucket of water out like 6 months ago, or I'm going to take another bucket of water out, the bathtub's still overflowing. And that's like the state of play right now with climate change. So carbon offsets, I think we can forget about. And I'll pass off to Alyssa.
Okay. For me, I think what's hot is growth. I think everyone's been talking about that. So I am excited to see how this boom in ESG is working to transform the real estate sector in particular. I think with so many new opportunities and new jobs coming online in this space, there are new opportunities, particularly I think for women and people of color to enter this space in sort of a new and different pathway than has traditionally been the case for moving into real estate. In terms of what's not, I would say lack of transparency. I think you've got to disclose, like I said, no more kicking the can down the road, no more we're thinking about it, or our numbers are bad, so we don't want to report. Back to what Eric was talking about earlier, it's there is a spectrum, right, of performance, and everyone wants to see it. So I think we're seeing companies getting dinged now for not reporting, more so than a company that reports and shows that they have some room for improvement.
Pass the baton.
I will pass the baton over to Jim.
I was afraid I was going to be last in this thing. So I'll just say very quickly, because I know we're out of time. We've talked about conversions, and we've talked about social issues and real estate. So we've talked about a lot of things here. I mean, look, obviously in the last 2 years, since summer 2000, DEI has become, a much bigger topic than it had been before. Every major company like MetLife, has a DEI committee and subcommittees. And, I know I'm on 2 of them here at MetLife. And there's conversation where there wasn't. And as this progresses, and as we're, looking at structural imbalances in real estate, and this is my focus, and how to, work with more MBE and WBE, investors, which we are. We had $48 million in 2 investments last year that, we wouldn't probably have done previously. I think that's only going to continue. So it's my last thought.
Pass the baton.
Evan, all yours.
I would say what's hot right now is office to residential conversions. And in terms of ESG, the reason that is because the most sustainable building you can have is one that's already built. And so if you can convert that to a better use, no matter what else you do on a new building, you're never going to beat that. What's not, I would say, similar to what Alyssa talked about with transparency, is greenwashing and just writing things down that you might do later, and as opposed to what you are doing now. So I'll just read everybody this quote that I shared with the panelists last week, and it is that, and when it comes to governance, recognizing the trade-offs and complications of trying to do the right thing and then actually doing the right thing. So you have to have those people in the room that are willing to do the right thing, and have the backbone, I suppose, to stand up for it and say, no, this needs to happen, and we're going to do it. And I just, as an example, with the mass timber, 4 months ago, nobody in the room, well, everybody liked it, but nobody really wanted to do it. And then 4 months later, after doing the research and proving it out, I get no pushback on it whatsoever. So
Great.
let me
Good
done.
to hear. Okay, who you passing to? You got two people to choose.
John.
All right.
Okay, sure. I'll try to be quick. I'd say what's hot is on the capital market side is scalability. Everyone wants to know that the solution that they're helping to fund, the idea that they're getting behind, is something that doesn't address just a small issue, but something that has meaningful impact, and one that extends. It's significant because there's just so much capital that's out and on the sidelines, so much dry powder that's out and that has found ways to weave ESG into its rationale. I'd say what's not is, from our narrow perspective, waiting on policy and regulations to change, to motivate it. I think we have been in some pretty meaningful discussions with, especially on the federal side, as well as with the GSEs. And the way that I've heard it described is we are trying to push the Titanic, but if we can move it an inch, then the world changes, right? And so I think there's this recognition that that's just such a slow moving process that strategies today can't rely on them. And so kind of the long game that's being played still contemplates it, but I would say that for the dollars that are being that are being deployed now, there's as Jim kind of alluded to, there's so many kind of immediate issues and regulatory and others that you have to respond to, that's really dominating the discussion. That's it.
All right, Dan, you were our opener and you're our closer. What do you think? What's hot, what's not in the world of ESG?
I think what's hot is management introspection, finding your business case, and pressing forward. What's not is inertia. I think we've heard that from everybody, and I think it's time to move. We are moving, and let's keep it up. It takes all of us. It takes all of us.
The old Nike slogan, just do it and get on board. Fantastic, everybody. Well, again, the panelists, I'm sure, would be happy to answer your questions. We've got their emails for you if you need it. Let us know. I want to thank you all panelists for doing such a fantastic job. Evan, Dan, John, Eric, and Alyssa, and Jim, you were fantastic. So we really, really appreciate your time. And we look forward to everybody tuning again next fall. We already have our first panel set up, again, fourth Thursday of the month. So this will be the fourth Thursday in September. And I think it will be focused. People will be interested. It's a company, it's a prop tech company that's working with data, Eric, and it's working on trying to help us measure and make some of these investment decisions. And so they've got a big ass dream. We'll see if they can pull it together, but we'll have members from their group kind of doing the anatomy of a prop tech company as it moves to assist the real estate markets. So with that, everybody have a wonderful weekend, evening first, then weekend. And for those of you that are students in the room, have a great summer. Enjoy it, but get your exams done first.